bear with me a second. Okay, so thank you for everyone for joining. It's not the usual Monday. I'm sure Ross can let you know why it's not a Monday, but but it is a Tuesday instead. So here we are. We have Ross Ensor to discuss games-based approaches. The mic should be off as you've come in, and we'd appreciate if they stay off, just to minimise any background noise. As I said before, you can find us on Twitter at Youth Soccer Coaches, Facebook at Youth Soccer Coaches, and on our website as well. We'd love to hear your feedback on how this is going today. So please use Twitter hashtag YSC Live, and we'd love, as I said, we'd love to hear your feedback, and I'm sure Ross would appreciate it too. This coming Monday, so 6 days from now, at the same time, we're going to have Kelly on from Kelly to discuss coaching in the US. So anyone interested about coaching in the US, or any experiences or the benefits, all that sort of stuff, I will post a link in the chat shortly. So tonight, as I said, we've got Ross for games-based approaches, with references to literature and his sort of practical environments. And the slides will be available, so let me know if you want a copy at the end. Further ado, I will hand over to Ross. Yeah, floor's yours, and I'm going to let everyone else in that's waiting patiently.
Thanks, Craig. Evening, everyone. It's great to meet you all. First of all, as Craig says, I'm really sorry to gate crashed your Champions League night. It was entirely my fault. We got given the green light by the Premier League to start back in training in England last night, so we had to move it to tonight. So sorry about gate crashing. I think it's Juve Porto, but hopefully we should be done by 8 o'clock. So tonight I'm just going to be giving you an overview of games-based approaches in youth football, kind of some of the underpinning theory behind it, how you try and use it with your players, and try and address any questions you have. I've said to Craig the slides and my Twitter and email available to you also. If you've got any further questions down the line that you potentially forget to ask, or if you just want to connect and have a discussion about different games, different coaching approaches, that's my favourite thing to do. Yeah, if you've got any questions or you'd like to make contact after this, then please feel free either via Twitter, drop me a direct message, or email me as well. So without further ado, I'm going to get started. So for the next 30 or 40 minutes or so, potentially longer, I'm going to provide an overview of games-based approaches. So what are they? What do they look like? How do they try and support learning with your players? But also we're going to look at, well, what are some of the holistic benefits that our players within our sessions can get from them? Because yes, we want to develop their ability to play the game, but also we've got a lot of other benefits that we can impact on when adopting these as well. So life skills, etc. I'm going to touch upon that as well, and I'm going to try and show you different frameworks on how you can implement those within your coaching sessions with your players. There's not a rigid, and I'll reference this later on as I'm working my way through the presentation, but there's not a rigid framework on how to implement these. It's very much on you as a coach and what your players need. But I'm just going to show you some different approaches. So just a little bit about me, just so you know who's speaking. You're like, who's this stranger? Now, my name's Ross, as Craig said. My role within football, I work within the pre-academy and the foundation phase at Wolverhampton Wanderers in the UK. I've worked there for about the last 4 years now. So the rise has just been incredible. I assure you, none of it's down to me, but the new owners. Prior to that, I was at West Bromwich Albion. I worked within the academy development groups within their age groups. So I crossed the divide in a sense. I am a West Brom fan. I do get a lot of stick for it. I can't really say anything back at the moment because we're not 19th in the Premier League, but there we go. And I suppose my my day job, I'm a lecturer within sports coaching and sports science within the University of Worcester, which is, as you know, in the middle of the UK, within their Lincoln International Colleges. But I've always been interested in games-based approaches from my when I was first introduced to them as a student. I've always tried to implement them within my coaching sessions. So that's just a little bit about me and my journey. So first of all, I'm sure people have heard of games-based approaches before, or a lot of frameworks teaching games for understanding, etc. Now, what I'm going to speak about first, what are they? Okay. Now, what they aim to do, I should say, they aim to promote a player-centered or an athlete-centered approach to learning. So the learner's at the forefront of this. Now, it's different with a lot of other different approaches that it focuses on the game as a whole, the game itself, rather than isolated components of it, such as technique or skills. So and the practice activities take place either in the game, so the actual game that they're playing, so 3v3s, 4v4s, 5v5s, modified games, so they've got a challenge to solve within the game, or different game type activities, and we'll explain what those are later on. Now, there's kind of a repositioning of the coach within this. Now, in terms of our behaviours, now within these approaches, we're trying to use fewer instructions. We're not trying to tell players what to do all the time, because in the game they're going to have to solve problems on their own, free and independent from us. So these environments really encourage that. So we support learning within these approaches through questioning to check understanding, but also develop new knowledge as well. So asking them questions throughout. So just to bring all that together, what we're trying to do, we're trying to prepare thinking players that are aware of what they do in the game, so they can then play it. So they know why they do certain things. Because at the end of the day, we're preparing players to play a game, and our environment should try and replicate that as much as possible. And that will look different for everybody, depending on the ability of the players or the amount of experiences that we have, or our players have, I should say. Now, in the next couple of slides, I'm just going to talk to you about some of the underpinning theory. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, just kind of some of the underpinning theory behind them. Now, the main theory from an individual point of view is constructivism. Now, just as a whistle-stop tour, knowledge in terms of constructivism involves the whole body. So it's the mind, the feet, everything, and all of its senses. Now, to know something from a constructivist perspective, this is a theory of education. It's not just to be able to repeat the right answer. So you probably ask a player, "Oh, what do you do here?" Or "What would you do in this scenario?" They might repeat it. Well, what constructivism is saying is real knowledge is being able to enact it. So, in other words, being able to do it in the required context. If I know something, I should be able to do it. And expressing it and answering questions is a part of it, but it's not all of it. So to fully know something, we have to try and be able to do it within the context, which in this case is the game. And what we're saying is our learning environments should replicate the game as much as possible. So our mind and body are learning. Now, if we design good games, now, as I said it previously, it's kind of a reposition of the coach. Sometimes we've got this, and I know I'm guilty of it, and I'm sure we all are, where as a coach we think that only learning can occur if we're in control of it. Now, we can't control learning. We can direct it, but we can't control it. But if we design good games, the body's going to be learning anyway. They're going to be learning to play the game at a subconscious level. Now, as more of a group word, so as I said, football's a team game, we then link into this theory called complex learning theory. And it suggests that learning, there's no end point to it. We can always adapt our skills and our knowledge of the game based upon new scenarios. So this is broken down to 3 key areas. So learning's an active process, so we can always adapt our knowledge. Learning's social. Football's a team game. we have to get through another team to score, and we have to play with our friends on a Saturday or a Sunday, wherever we play our games. So learning has to be social with our friends and the players that we play with, because that's what happens. There's very rarely on a football pitch where we're playing on our own. You think even in a 1v1, it's dictated by what the other players are doing, by in terms of how much space we have, what direction we go when we dribble. It's still directed by the players in our team. So our learning environment should replicate that as much as possible. And it's a process of interpretation. Now, what I mean by this is, if we can adapt, if we can promote an environment that we can share our ideas with our teammates, so it's being social, we then get to share our ideas on the game with our teammates. Now, what we can do, we can share our thoughts and our feelings, and then we can adapt together as a group, not just as an individual. So you think, if somebody's coaching me and they never ask me any questions, or I've never got a chance to share my interpretation of what's going on in a game with my teammates, that stays with me. So I might adapt, my teammates don't, but I'm going to be playing with them on a Saturday. So but this will make more sense as we go through. Now, I'm just going to show you some different frameworks now of games-based approaches. Now, I'm sure we've heard of the common one, teaching games for understanding, which was developed back in the 80s now. And there's been several developed since then. So we've got game sense, play practice, tactical games approach, and several more. These are frameworks of games-based approaches. Now, when I first saw all these, and I'm sure a lot of people are the same, when they see all these games-based approaches, they think, oh, which one do I use? They're all different. Which one do I implement with my players? Now, in 2013, I would recommend this author, Richard Lloyd, proposed four components that all games-based approaches have. He's saying, yeah, there's loads, but there's these four things in all of them. So essentially, it doesn't really matter which one we use, just as long as these four are involved. So the first one is designing a representative learning environment. So designing an environment that replicates the game or a part of the game. Now, the reason behind that is, I'll come on a bit more detail later on. That makes sense to players. It's authentic. They can recognise a game. The first question we get asked, when are we playing a game? Because that's what they recognise. That's what they're going to do on a Saturday or when they play the games. Emphasising questioning to generate dialogue. If we question players, individuals, yes, they can recall information. They can reflect as well. And then we can develop new knowledge. We can then provide opportunities for evaluation and testing of ideas in their team. So they share their ideas, they come up with strategies, they come up with tactics based on the game that's going on around them. And that will look different for every team. And finally, developing a supportive environment. So a supportive environment that fosters a love of learning, a love of playing the sport. Yes, we're there to develop them from a performance perspective, but also there's a lot of health benefits involved as well. And chances are the players in our care probably aren't going to play professional. But what we can do is that's not for the one to try in. It's just it's just potential facts. But what we can do is we can give them an environment that makes them fall in love with the sport and develop lifelong relationships with their friends and their teammates. So if I reflect back to the theory that I just showed you, so designing a learning environment that's authentic, we then come back to that constructivism where the body's learning subconsciously and the questioning as well. Opportunities for evaluation and testing ideas. Well, that's complex learning theory. I'm sharing my interpretation of what's going on with my teammates. We're interacting. We're then adapting as a team based upon what's going on around us. But I'm going to touch upon what each of these four things entail as we move through. So the first one I'm going to touch on is designing an authentic learning environment. Now, the reason I had a bit of reflection on this one. I used to put a building as that image there. Now, the reason I've changed it to an artist is because a building is fixed. It implies an environment's fixed, and we can take that environment everywhere we go. Now, an authentic learning environment will look different for probably, I don't know how many's on this call, I can't see all of them. We'll probably have 50 different ones, just because our players have got different abilities, different knowledge, different needs. So with an artist analogy, when we're painting a canvas, we can add different colours, darker colours. We can add different things onto it. So it's not fixed. We can change it depending on where we go. But a building's quite fixed, so I've changed that. And again, these environments will be different. So don't think, oh, I've got to copy that framework or copy this. Make it relevant to your players. What you will know what your boys or your girls need, what your players need. So we're going to do a little task now, which I'd like you to type your answer in the chat box if you can. So our coaching sessions are broken down into training for. So these are drill-based activities, technical work, unopposed stuff, and playing for. So we've got small-sided games, condition games with challenges in, or game type activities. So training for and playing for. What percentage do you think coaches spend a higher percentage in? Now, this is UK coaches. This is from research. So do you think they spend a higher percentage in training for across a 1 hour coaching session? Or do you think they spend more time in playing for? I'll give you a few seconds just to type your answers in. This is from UK. I would say this is not generic. Or a few bit of debate here. That's all right. A few seconds. Craig's put UK. Oh, Jason's on the fence, half and half. A few seconds. Oh, okay. Some different ones. Okay, now people have put a mixture of both. Okay. Now again, this is just from research that's been done in the UK of a 1 hour coaching session. And the high percentage is in training for. So on average in the UK, 65% of a 1 hour training session is in training form activities and 35% is in playing form. So what we can say there is that 65% is a lot of technical work, unopposed stuff, and only 35% is within a game or a game type activity. So we could argue that a lot of time within a session is spent practicing things that are outside the context of where we're going to use it. Now, I'm sure some people have seen this before within the past, with the general structure of a coaching session from technique to skill to small-sided game. So an increase in the level of opposition or complexity and just interference. So traditionally, if we look at it like this, we start with the technique. So we learn how to perform skill, often unopposed. We then progress into a skill practice where there's a bit more pressure and a bit more opposition. And finally, we then try and embed that within a small-sided game. Now, again, just some reflections on that from you guys. By structuring a session in this way and spending a lot of time in activities that aren't game type practices or small-sided games, how do we assume learning takes place by designing sessions in this way? So what do we think players need to do before they play a game? I'm not saying everyone does this because they don't, but this is the kind of the standard structure. How do we assume that what do we assume players have to do before they get to a game? The game's right at the end, isn't it? So just type your ideas and your reflections in the chat box. So we start from, yeah, good answers. Well done. Yeah. A few seconds. Good reflections. Well done. Yeah, good answers, guys. Well done. Okay, so within this, essentially, our assumptions about learning are that before playing the game, and we've all been in this, the players need to master some fundamental technical skills. So before they put that into a game. So they involve the feet, so learning how, and they often learn how to do it. So we learn the how before the where, the when, and the why. Now, there's a lot of potential debates about how learning environments should be structured. But one thing we do know about learning in terms of issues with this structure or assumption, learning is contextual. And there's been a lot of research that's been done into this, both in sport and outside of sport, that learning is contextual. So if we want players to learn something, we've got to try and replicate the context that they're going to use it as much as possible. So, for example, if I learn, oh well, I've gone a bit far there. So if I learn something, if I learn a technique first, that's potentially where it's going to stay. So what I've learned it in that context. I haven't learned it in the context where it's going to be used essentially within a game. Now, what we do here is we talked about the mind and the body learning, so learning the decisions and the skills at the same time potentially. Now, what we do here is we separate the mind and the body. So we become competent with our feet on how to do it. But if we spend too long in unopposed practices, we create that separation. And we separate the skill execution from decision making. And then we don't necessarily develop that tactical knowledge, not just in the big game, but in the small game as well. And again, this isn't saying that you should never use technical practices, because there's a time and a place, as we all know. But we're saying as much as we can, try and replicate the context of the game. Now, the problem with the final problem with this assumption, essentially, is we promote, and a few people said it in the chapter, we promote transfer rather than recognition. Now, to transfer something is essentially to take it and then put it somewhere else. But if we practice in a game like activity or a game type environment, we recognize the environment. So if we recognize it, we can then make decisions, and then the skill comes with it. But to transfer implies that we've got to take it from one place and then put it into another one. And we talk about being competent. Are they being competent at unopposed, or is it just being, or are they going to then use that within the game? So again, this isn't saying there's no room for technical practices, because we all know that a point that, excuse me, at a point your players may potentially need that depending on the ability of your group. But it's saying as quick as we can, try and get them into a game type activity. Now, with this assumption, we essentially say if we don't get them in a game that's close to the context quickly or early enough, we play football like this. So we don't involve the brain, we don't involve the mind, we use the feet. Where we all know, in fact, we play football like that. It might not look as clean. Well, it won't look as clean as a technical practice, but it will be more relevant in terms of their long-term learning. A lot of research has been done on this. Now, how do we do this? So, by planning good games or game type activities that replicate the game, it's authentic for the players. They recognise it. They recognise how and where, when they can apply it, and they're going to be learning subconsciously. Now, it combines skill, decision making, and tactical knowledge. As I said, the mind and the body are learning within the game. They're learning that subconsciously, and we can accelerate this by, and again, it depends on the needs of your players. We can change the space, the ratio, the complexity, depending on the ability level of your players. Now, a lot of ways you could do a lot of these game type activities. I'm just going to show you some examples now. There's designer and action fantasy games. Now, these are team challenges in the context of a small-sided game. I'm not going to show you anything new here. I'm sure you've seen these before. And what these do is they highlight a problem for the players to solve around a full game or a part of it. So it might be defending when they're outnumbered, support play, counter-attacking, etc. So no one in Premier League history will ever forget this moment. I'm sure we all remember where we were when this happened. the famous Aguero moment. So within this team challenge, you've got Man City, who had one extra player. So they're 2-1 behind, but they need 2 goals to win the game. QPR were a man down in that game, but they got a player sent off. So if you look, the tactical concepts or the challenges that we're embedding within this are Man City, it's attacking with an overload. How do you attack with an overload within your team? Within a game, that's a team challenge you've got to solve. QPR, now this is a funny one because I'm sure we've all been there with our players. Whenever we say, oh, we're doing defending, it's, oh, defending, I want to get on the ball, I want to score. Well, this is kind of hidden, this is kind of hiding the defending in a sense, where you're saying, right, you've got a player sent off, so they're practicing defending when outnumbered. They might not know it, but they're practicing defending when they're outnumbered. So they've got to solve that problem as a team. So this is kind of a designer game, and you can do this with any team. What I would suggest with this is be creative with it. Be creative with it. Players will recognise these scenarios, as we all know, and they'll be able to reflect back to them. And it creates, yes, they're repeating something, but it's in a fun game. It's a challenge within the game that they've got to solve. A lot of the time, QPR win this one when I use it, actually. So it might not be working. So we've talked a lot about games and game type activities, but what does that mean? So if we break a game down to its fundamental parts, within a game or a game type practice, some things you can try and embed within it. A game has got a goal or a target to it for. We're trying to score in a goal or we're trying to achieve a target. So it might be the ball into an end zone. It might be putting the ball into a goal, but we're trying to get a target. We're trying to achieve a target. There is an element of opposition. We are playing against another team or some kind of interference. Now, this might look different depending on the group of players that you have. Now, it might be overloads, underloads. You might match them up. It might be 3v3, 4v4. Now, for younger age groups, I've done this with players who perhaps haven't got the same repetition in terms of technical ability. We've done overloads of 3v1 within a counter-attacking practice, for example. They're trying to score in the goal. It's still an element of opposition. And then if they get it, if they become better at it in a few weeks' time, then we might increase it to 3v2 or 4v3. But again, you can decrease and increase the amount of players or the complexity based upon the ability of your players. Transition. So we've got to get through the other team to score. When we win possession, we've got to try and hit the target. When we've lost possession, we've got to try and stop the other team hitting our target. So I don't know whether you'll agree with this. I see a lot of players now where this is a big problem in terms of they play the game on their own, and when they lose the ball or when they get the ball, they don't know what to do because they haven't practiced it. They've done individual technical work. But a game or a game type activity has got an element of transition. And there is within the game we've all played, there's constant problems for us to solve. How do we get through the other team? How do we stop the other team scoring within our target? So these are just some fundamental things that I've broken it down to. There may be more, and if you think of any more, please send them to me. So a game type activity or a game has got elements of these in. And again, they'll look different based upon the players that you've got and what they need. So some activities, as I say, you've got the game, small-sided game, 3v3, 4v4, let's just play. You've got condition games, where there's a challenge for them to solve, or a designer game where they've got to overcome a challenge or overcome an issue, but they're learning within the game. All kinds of situational activities. Now, these are things like 3v1, 3v2s, where we're incorporating the skill with decision-making. Now, again, you're probably seeing this as a whole part whole. Just a potential way you could structure your session. Again, you could change it based upon the needs of your players and what they need. But this is kind of a whole part whole way of doing it. So you've got, as soon as they get in the building, as soon as they arrive at the venue, it's arrival activity, they're straight in the game. Now, what I've done in the past is, and I'm sure you guys have done this before, where the arrival activity is sowing the seeds and getting them to embed what's to come. Now, the challenges within these games are based around the topic that we're going to be doing. So, for example, for me, we did dribbling yesterday in training. So all we did, it was a normal game, but we put end zones in. We marked out end zones before the goals, and the players had to try and dribble into the end zone before they scored. So they're learning what's to come. So their body's actively learning as soon as they arrive. Then you could have a situational activity. It might be a technical practice if your players need that. And then finally, a design a game at the end. Now, a lot of people, and I was included right at the start on this, who thinks it was just, oh, we're just going to play a game. The game or the game type activity, as I've said previously, we have to modify it to make it relevant to the journey of the players that are in our care, and they will be different depending on where we go. So we can manipulate the number of players, 2v2s, 3v3s, and what outcomes would we get there? Size of the playing area. For players who haven't got a lot of experience in terms of playing the game, or haven't got the same level, haven't got a high level of ability in terms of on the ball, what kind of a nice way of doing it is if you make the area bigger or the game bigger. So what that does is they get more success because the ball doesn't go out as much. But if you get a really tight area of players who've got potentially low technical ability, they might get disheartened because the ball's always going out. So what we do, particularly with the pre-academy players, we make the area bigger, or the maximum it could be, based on what they're playing, whether it's 3v3, 4v4, etc. You've got things like, obviously, representation has to represent the game. Exaggeration. Now, exaggeration is what it says on the tin, how you modify a game. It's highlighting a particular situation or a particular thing or a topic. So if you're doing counter-attacking 5v3, it's 5v3 overloads, for example. So it's really exaggerated. It's making it really explicit to the players. This is what we're doing. And complexity. But again, so increasing the tactical demands. So it might be where they are on the pitch, width, depth, dropping behind, dispersal. Well, again, it depends what returns you want. It depends on the topic that you're doing. So if I show you this one, 2v2, it's a small pitch. So we're probably not going to get a lot of width, but we probably are going to get a lot of that probably encourages combinations, 1-2s, playing around the corners. So you probably get a lot of penetration in that. You probably you don't get a lot of potentially width or dispersal or depth, or you don't get as much depth as what you do in other practices. But if I increase it to 3v3, we immediately get width within the practice and we get depth. And the classic one is 4v4. We've got the whole shebang. We've got depth, so we've got a player behind here. We've got width, 2 players out wide. And we've got a player pass forward to penetration as well. So it depends what you want to do. If you're looking at switching play, probably 3v3, where you get a lot of width, really highlights and exaggerates that. Penetration, 2v2, really highlights combinations, 2v2s. If I go to 4v4, we can use that for switching play, but we can kind of make that we can kind of make 4v4 around anything, because it's got width, it's got depth, it's got penetration, so a player to pass forward to. But again, it depends on what you want and the topic that you're working on with players. So just by changing the number of players that we have within the game, maybe 2v2, 3v3, 4v4, all the way up to whatever level that you work at, it gives us different tactical demands. And again, it depends on what we're working on. But you've got to think about, right, what do I want to get from this? Now, I'm just going to show you some examples now of how how we'd adopt this potential framework within a whole session. So the arrival activity, it's a 5v5. It could be 4v4, but again, depends on what you want to get out of the players. But we're talking about developing possession within this, and the pitch is marked out into quarters. Now, the topic for the session is around developing possession. So keeping the ball. When do we go forward? When do we build? When do we recycle it? So this is a rival activity. So they've got to try and pass the ball in each quarter of the pitch before they score. If they do that, they get 10 goals. Now, terminology is key here. I've always believed, I'm sure you'll agree. If I say you have to pass the ball in every quarter before you score, that takes decision making away. I'm telling you, right, you have to do it before you score. Then there's no decision making going on. I've made the decision for the player. This is what you need to do when you get the ball. The real element of decision making is deciding where, when, and why you do something. And the coaching behaviours within this practice would potentially be just watching and seeing, right, what do they already know? What are they bringing out? And then that can feed into your next practice. So you might think, oh, they're having a lot of success at this. I might need to I might need to make it harder or more challenging. Or, you know, they're struggling here, so I might decrease it. I might get an overload. I might do 3v1, for example, or 4v2 or 5v2, etc. But it's sowing in the seeds of what's to come. So they're thinking about, right, when can I keep the ball in each quarter? When do I pass forwards? When do I pass sideways? When do I pass backwards? All these decisions are going on. And then looking how, where, when, and why they do something. Now, the part practice. So we're looking at it's a possession practice. So we're looking at 5v5 again, depending on the needs of your players. So they're trying to keep possession in their teams and pass the ball from one of the gates to their end player. Now, the reason I put end players in here is that with possession activities, and a lot of them they're in a box, and they're just trying to keep the ball in their team. Which there is some transfer there, of course there is, because there's an element of opposition. They've got to keep the ball away from the other team. But if we think we're keeping possession, we've got to go through the other team. It's directional. So if we can't go forwards, then we go sideways or backwards. So if we put a target player in the end zone, they've got something to aim at. They've got to think, right, when can I pass the ball forward? So they're making that decision. And there's interference there. It's 5v5. But you can quite easily modify this to a 5v3 or whatever the ability of your players, whatever they need. And then taking that learning back into the game. So the team challenges, it's a Spanish or the Barcelona game. So however many in your build-up as a team, however you might use the quarters in, you might take them out, depending on what you've seen in the previous practice. They might already know it. However many goals however many passes you make as a team in the build-up, that equals the amount of goals you get. And again, we're not taking the decision away because they can still score a normal goal. So, for example, if they work really hard and they've won the ball close to the team's goal, they're not going to go, oh, I've got to pass the ball 5 times before I score. Because in a game, they wouldn't do that. They just put the ball in the goal. So that's the thing. If we put limits on things, we've always got to think, right, what are we doing it for? What are we taking away from this practice? Potentially some realism. But if we say, right, however many passes you do equals the amount of goals you get as a challenge, then they've got those decisions. They could score a normal goal. They can keep the ball and score and complete as many passes as they can. They're making decisions. They're using the skill. They're making decisions, and they're developing the tactical knowledge because they're thinking, right, do I pass forward? Do I pass backwards? Do we build? Or do we just counter and go and score? Now, we talk about the body learning subconsciously, and that will happen if we design good games. Those are just some examples. Now, I'm going to talk about questioning. Now, behaviours that we do within our sessions, we're trying to develop the knowledge within our players, aren't we? To try and help them learn about a particular topic in more detail and help them play the game. Now, the 3 common behaviours within a coaching session, according to research, are instruction. So this is what you do. This is what we're doing. Feedback, so giving feedback on performance. How well did a player complete a certain task? And finally, questioning. These are the 3 common behaviours that we would suggest we use within a coaching session. Now, again, what behaviour do you think is the highest percentage used within a coaching session? Do you think it's and again, type your answer in the chat box. Do you think it's instruction? Do you think it's feedback? Or do you think it's questioning? Oh, a bit of debate. I like these. There's some debate in these. Oh. Okay, last few seconds. Okay, guys. Bit of debate there. Okay. Now, the highest is instruction, 42%. So what's that saying is nearly half of our behaviours within a coaching session is instruction to tell the players what to do. Feedback's 10%, feedback on performance, and questioning 7.8%. It's a low percentage. Now that's not saying that there's not a room for instruction. But what it's saying is that if our only behaviour is instruction, how does that impact learning for our players? Because instruction might be, you might have a venue where you've got to cross the road to get to the pitch. You have to instruct them. You can't say, you can't say to a 5-year-old, when do you think we should cross the road? And ask them a question. Yeah, sometimes they might need instruction. But by our behaviours reflecting this, what are our assumptions about learning? Well, what we're saying is we're the experts. We're the experts. That the coach is the holder of all knowledge. The coach is the gatekeeper. All learning is directed from the coach. Unless I tell you what to do, you don't learn anything. I'm the expert. And the players are just empty vessels. They've got nothing going on up there. They can't think for themselves. We need to direct them like we're steering a ship. We need to tell them what to do. Now, what questioning does, and the real art of the question, as we said before, if we design good games, the body's going to be learning anyway, subconsciously. It'll learn based upon the environment. Now, what questioning does, when you ask somebody a question, it brings their actions to the conscious mind. Now, what that does is, because they're then expressing it through speech. So if I asked any of you a question, you'd bring it to your mind and then you'd answer it. Now, what this does is, this is a very powerful thing, because we talked about that separation of the mind and the body. This creates that connection simply by designing a good game and asking a question. It brings their actions to the mind. Oh, Johnny, tell me what you did in this scenario. Oh, I did this. Okay, why did you do that? So what we're doing is we're asking them to recall what they've done, which will help them reflect. Was it good? Was it bad? Why? Why did you do that? Why didn't you pass to so-and-so? And by stimulating that recall and that reflection, what we're actually doing is we're constructing new knowledge for the players. They're thinking about, oh, I might do this next time, or I might do that. You know, that didn't work because of this. So we're creating reflective players who are thinking and learning about the game. And all we've done is asked a question. But in order to do this, our questions have got to try and be as open as possible. Now, what I mean by this is trying to avoid yes or no within individuals. Now, questions can include what, where, why, how. And the question, the questioning might be different for each individual. You'll know your players within your groups. Some will have a lot of experience. Some will know things. Some have got a higher ability. They'll know what they do. Others won't. They won't be able to go into a lot of detail with questioning. So one way we can do this is structure our questioning from, we call it low to high order questions. I'm going to come on to that in a minute. But I'm just going to show an example of a yes or no question. So the first one, Molly drew the defender and then passed. Was that the best option? It's yes or no. Does that it doesn't really tell us a lot. It doesn't encourage the player to reflect on what they've done. It's just answering a question. Now we talk about low to high order questions. Now low order questions is just simply recall. So there's a limited number of responses. Oh, tell me what you did there. Oh, I did this. Limited number of responses. Those are just recalling what they've done and trying to develop that understanding. But higher order, there's a multiple responses because you're promoting that analysis, that evaluation, and that synthesis within the player. So they're reflecting on what they've done. Now, this is a really good resource. This is created by CamelPal, who I'd encourage you to follow on Twitter. Now, this is an example from low to high order questioning that you can ask individuals with some examples of what you do. Now, if I direct you right to the end, so remembering, tell me why you do this. They're just recalling. But the further up the continuum that we go, the more players are having to reflect and think and construct new knowledge, because we end up at creating, where they're creating solutions and problems to things within the game. Now, this isn't saying that every player you'll be able to ask a high order or a create question to. Some might need a recall question first. Why did you do that? Oh, I did this, and then build it up. And there's nothing wrong with that, because we're still, by asking the question, we're still stimulating that reflection, which is fine. And if anyone wants this, I can send it out to them. Now, what we're saying here is, right, we've had an experience in the environment, so our body has, but by asking a question, we can promote reflection to construct new knowledge, and that is a powerful thing because it promotes thought, and it promotes really thinking players that are actively reflecting on what's going on in the game. They're not waiting for the coach to tell them, "Oh, this is what you do." That can solve problems in the game because that's what they've practiced. Now, that's for individuals. Now, in terms of collaboration as a group and how we can support this, once players have played a game, so when they're in the game, they're playing with their teammates within training, and they know how it works. This is how we score. This is what we need to do within our team to beat the other team. They can solve problems as a team because they played it, and they can create strategies and tactics to overcome through sharing ideas, through discussion. Now, refer back right at the start. Now, this is done in timeout, so it might be that they've played the game, they then get together as a team, and they create strategies, they create tactics, and they share ideas. Now, what this does is, think back to complex learning theory at the start. Through these discussion periods as a team, so how are you going to overcome this problem? With it, each player is sharing their interpretation of the situation. They share that with the group, so they interact to create a strategy. Now, it might be that players are playing in different positions, so they're sharing interpretation of how they'd overcome and what that means to them. So they share their interpretations, they interact, and then once they've created a strategy that works and they've reflected upon it, they can then adapt as a team. And then when we come to a game, they'll be able to adapt within the game because they've already solved the problem. Through that element of discussion, they've created tactic and they've come up with a solution. Now, our job as a coach within this, as we say, is not to just sit on our deck chair. We're there. If you've got two teams, we've set them off on their discussions. We're asking probing questions. Okay, but would that work if this come in? Would that work if this happened? So that's promoting that reflection all the time. Now, one way of doing this, as I say, there's not a structure, but one way of doing this tactical timeout, so where they're having to discuss issues as a team and get through them. So first of all, we start the game. Right, this is how we score. This is what we need to do. Let's play for a few minutes. Then you might be going round asking individuals, okay, what's the problem here? What have you got to solve? So, just so they're trying to solve what you want them to solve. And what I mean by that is you're getting their interpretation. So, what's the idea of the game? If you design a game based around a particular thing, if you ask a player what the problem is, potentially, they should confirm that. They should be able to say, oh, we're trying to solve this. And then that's a line then. Now, what we do is after they've played the game, get them into the groups, 2 teams, and then they can solve potential problems through collaboration with strategies. It might be on a particular problem or an issue. So it might be coming back to what we spoke before about. So defending when outnumbered, how are we going to defend this as a team? How are we going to use this overload? What are we going to do? How are we going to use it? So they come up with their strategy and their tactic. They then put it back into the game and see if it works. And if they've got time, reflecting on it and refining it again. So they're adapting to what's going on around. They're reflecting on how well their strategy is, and they're adapting within the game. Now, again, these are just some ideas that you may. I'm sure the slides are being sent out, but these are just some ideas that you may use. Now, there's a particular way of doing this called a debate of ideas. Now, what this is where you haven't got a particular subject in mind or a topic in mind. They're just playing. But you're getting them to reflect on the opposition team. Okay, so what, and this is a kind of a structure. So the first question as a coach will be, okay, what is the other team good at? What are the strengths? Well, they're good at this. Okay. How are we going to cope with these strengths? So we've got a strategy to overcome it. So, for example, we know they've got a fast player in behind as a forward. How are we going to overcome that? Are we going to press high? Are we going to drop deep? How are we going to overcome it? Or they've got a quick player on the left wing, but he can only use his left foot. How are we going to combat that? Oh, we force him inside. So they formulate strategies in teams, and then they test it within the game. So that's a debate of ideas. This is when you haven't got a particular topic in mind. Again, that's similar to what I spoke about before. Question starters is when you've got a particular topic in mind. So this is one based on loads. And again, these are just frameworks. I always think it's best to come up with your own questions because you know what you want to get out of it. You know what you want your players to know by the end of it. It might be through speech or it might be actually showing it within the game. But again, these are some useful chapters. And if anyone wants a copy of these, I can send them out to you after the presentation. So just some tips that I've found out these for questioning. I know I've been guilty of this. I'm sure we all have. When we ask players a question as a group or a problem to solve, we've got to allow them that thinking time and that reflection time to discuss an answer. And I know we think, oh, we've got this amount of time, they've got to answer quick, otherwise they don't know it. And there's no set time for this, but you'll know your players. So try and allow that reflection, that thinking time, both individual and as a group as well. Another one, limit leading to a desired response. Now, what that means is when we ask a question, we'll have a particular response in mind of what we want the players to say. Now, what that is if we ask this question too much, kids aren't stupid. Kids will learn the answer. So then you get into a point where they're just reciting it and repeating it rather than actually learning what it means. So try and have your questions as open as possible, I would say. I say monologues. So the best way I can describe this is allow that magic to occur, allow that interaction to occur with players. I know as a coach, that's our first, and I know I'm the same, it's our first, it's our default to think, oh, we've got to be in control or some element in control of everything. But try and encourage that interaction. Try and set the challenge, set the question, then get out again and let that interaction occur. Another way, and I'll talk about potential domination. This depends on how you look at this. Trying to manage potential domination. We'll have players within our groups, I'm sure, that are very confident and they'll answer all the questions, they'll know all the answers, and they'll want to share all the time. That's when we ask them an individual question. But if we're talking about putting them in a team they'll just dominate the discussion, which is great that they're confident individuals, but we want everybody to share their experiences so then they can form a strategy as a team. So we need a way to manage that discussion. Now, the easiest way to do this that I've found in the past is if you give each team a football, and each player can speak for a certain amount of time, 10 seconds, and the only one who's got the football can speak. And if you want to speak, you ask for the football. So that manages the potential domination and in terms of the potential of one player dominating the discussion, which we want everybody to feel confident to share their ideas, share their interpretations of what's going on, to make learning more meaningful to them. Now, developing supportive environment, I always end with this. This kind of perma analogy. It's not a hair product. Now, these are just some things that have been suggested to be why children remain in sport, why they have a lifelong affiliation with sport through games. So, games breed positive emotions. They enjoy the game more than anything else. Anything else. That's the first question we get asked, as I'll come back to at the start. When are we going to play a game? That's the thing that they fall in love with. They don't fall in love with passing a ball against the wall, essentially. Some may, but 99 times out of 100 they won't. They like playing the game. So that'll breed positive emotions if our environments reflect the game as much as possible. They're engaging with the context. They're engaging with something that they know. They know the game. By promoting that interaction with each other through that collaboration and that discussion, and by playing with other people within our group and within our team, subconsciously what we're doing, we're building relationships. We're creating a sense of belonging. They're in an environment where they feel comfortable to share their views and they feel comfortable with their friends because they've been promoted to have that level of interaction. The coach doesn't control everything, so they're not hiding away. Learning's meaningful because it's in the context of the game, it's authentic, they can recognise it. And they achieve something together, whether it's in training or within the game. Now, again, these things have been suggested to keep children within sport. And this is lifelong affiliation. Now, chances are the players within our groups won't play professional football or professional soccer. That's a fact. But what we can do is we can give them a positive experience and give them all of the benefits that sport and football within games can bring them, not just from, as I've just said right at the start, holistic. So sharing ideas, health, and all the positive benefits that sport can bring. So in that, digressing, research on performance. I'm sure people are asking, right, okay, but how does it impact players performing in the game? Now, there's been a lot of research on this, and they've looked at two groups. So they've got a group that has just done technical training, and they've got a group which has done an element of games-based approach, is what we talk about. And what they found that at the end of the study period, the participants who have been involved in the games-based sessions have got better on and off the ball decision making and skill execution, so they can execute skills and they make better decisions because they've practiced an environment that's close to the game. While the technical group, short term, they'll have an uptick. Long term, it just goes down and down and down and down because it becomes less relevant to the game. So again, there's a lot more work to be done in this area in terms of research over a long period of time, because the research that we're talking about is over a season. We need to look at the benefits over 2, 3, 4, 5 seasons. That's for any PhD students out there who are looking to do further research and study. That's one for you. I'd be excited to read it. So it has been proved. It has been proven to, and this is to improve performance in games. These aren't on tests that are an isolated test. This is actually in-game performance. So just to round everything up, because I know people want to watch Porto and Juve. Within this, I've tried to give you some of the benefits of games-based approaches and look at how you adopt them within your coaching sessions. Again, I'm no means trying to instruct or preach everyone what to do. I'm just highlighting some of the potential benefits on and how you do it. But by adopting these, we can provide a holistic learning environment that's really athlete-centered, that allows them to develop as individuals and as a group through designing good practice games that are authentic, that represent the game. Develop questioning to improve recall, understanding, and develop knowledge. Allow them to collaborate and share ideas as a team and adapt as a team. Think back right at the start. And developing a positive learning environment that develops that love of learning, of the game, and of sport as well for engagement. Thanks for listening, guys. I know the chat box has been firing off as we've been going through, so I'm more than happy to answer any questions now that you may have. You can